So let's talk about disruption. So I read an article recently that talked about there was some correlation between mass crises in history and that potentially spurred large leaps in innovation. And, you know, as a designer, that kind of grabs my attention. I completely lost the article, but what I thought would be interesting is to actually just go back and take a look at some maybe similar significant events from the past and see if there is in fact anything of value to learn. So if you'll indulge me, let's take a little walk back into our dark history. Let's begin way back. 14th century, the bubonic plague, it killed 50 million people. So this was 60% of Europe's entire population. However, this fundamentally altered the economic and social structure of the entire, of all of Europe. It ended serfdom, and it introduced us to this new thing that we refer to today as the middle class that did not exist before this time. Between the 14th and 15th century, France and England were kicking the shit out of each other. The veracity of this struggle, it raped the land, and it killed so many people that what happened is you've got terrible land and a lack of laborers. From that, there was forced innovation in agriculture, and it served as the foundation of really the agricultural revolution. In the 1600s, London got nailed by bubonic plague repeatedly, like 3 times. It killed 25% of London's population. At the same time, Shakespeare decided to practice stay at home, and he wrote King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra. At the same time, Isaac Newton was practicing social distancing. He goes out into the country, apple hits him in the head, and he started writing some of the papers that really were the groundwork for the theories of gravity and modern calculus and optics and the laws of motion. Fast forward early 1700s, smallpox hits Boston, and over probably about half the population was impacted. And for the first time in response to this, they started experimenting with public inoculations. And inoculations is a precursor to what we know as vaccinations today. What's interesting about that was that the public debate and just the contentiousness of actually doing that, it prompted the very first instance of an independent press, which is what we know today. You know, early 20th century, Spanish flu. Spanish flu infected 1/3 of the world's population. The learnings and the response to that really sparked the key foundational understanding, looking at root causes, understanding the role of diet. It really established the foundation of modern medicine today. And then in our own lifetime, you know, we saw SARS ravage Asia. They instituted massive quarantines, and as a result, retail sales plummeted. But at the same time, you know, this environment created a situation where actually China finally really adopted the intranet. And at the time, there was this little startup called Taobao, who later renamed themselves Alibaba, and is now one of the world's largest e-commerce sites. And then more recently in our history, the recent financial crisis. Looking at kind of taking a fresh perspective on shared resources, we saw companies like Uber, Airbnb emerge from the ashes. So that's great. That's interesting. I've been thinking a lot, reading a lot, to be honest, about what might be prompting some of these, like this relationship between the crisis and this movement. And so I'm thinking, when you look at some of these examples, what it did was it prompted a recognition that what we were doing before was no longer working or no longer applied in the situation. And there was this forced acceptance of really a new reality. There's no way to ignore what's going on. It also fostered this openness to new thinking that was never there before. At the same time, in some of those cases, right, it was like the scarcity bred resourcefulness. And like there was a lot of those cases, there was pre-existing conditions, but there was like this heightened awareness that we can no longer ignore this. And in some cases, it sparked critical debate, like probably much overdue. The other thing that you see is like this renewed recognition of looking for mutually beneficial outcomes, this attitude of, look, we need to come through this together with each other. And then in other cases, we think about the isolation itself, maybe provided some fertile creative ground. And whether it was that reflection or the scarcity of resources, what I think it did was that it prompted individuals and industry leaders to ask what really matters. And so it's interesting as we look at these past examples, I'd argue we're seeing many of these play out today. So if history tells us that we can expect some big pushes in innovation, where do we look, right? I mean, there's the obvious stuff, right? Entire industries have to be redesigned. Food, travel, sports, my friends in live entertainment, things that maybe we've never had to think about before around healthcare and emergency services and personal security. Some of us for the first time are thinking about financial security in a whole new way. The list goes on. We're going to have to think about really small interactions, right? Surface design, material design, to really big things. I think we can all agree we never had an appreciation for concepts like supply chain and geolocation and emergency preparedness. There is a gamut of what challenges that face us. And there's fuzzier concepts, right? Like misinformation and alternative facts and source of truth, credibility. These are all interesting things that we're seeing amplified and starting to really have a more visceral understanding of. And finally, I think, what connection really means, whether that's to each other, how we attempt to ground ourselves, or thinking about the earth and noticing how it's responding to the changes in our behavior. And then on a personal level, as we try and regain balance, right? What does it mean to connect back with ourselves? And I mean, I'll be honest, this is early, if you had asked me to give this talk 2 weeks ago, right, my observations would be completely different. We're seeing more and more challenging opportunity. And it kind of, for me, it prompts the next question of, who is going to be participating and critical in defining what the new normal is? I don't know, but I think that they'll be exhibiting traits like great observation and fantastic listening skills and empathy and a natural curiosity and willing to ask why, and the willingness to step back, look at the bigger picture, and then fearlessly like ideating and exploring with others who are also willing to step up and be catalysts. And the reality is that's us, right? Like we're the people that do this kind of thing, whether we do it because it's part of our living, or because it's those of us or those around us that we do it just because we can't stop ourselves. Now, I know there's a risk that this sounds a little tone deaf and might be a little insensitive or Pollyanna. And I understand that it's hard. This is unprecedented, I'd say, for all of us. It's going to take time to adjust. But what I'm asking is that when you're ready, let's lean into what we do best. Let's fuel our natural our gifts, our inclinations, our orientations. And a great example of that is deciding to come to tonight and just have a discussion is a fantastic start. I'm convinced that this is another one of those historic times. And with the challenges and the opportunities that are in front of us, I would hate to say that we missed it. So thanks for the opportunity to come and share some time with you.